Dan, I'm really excited to talk to you today. I should be excited for substantive reasons because obviously you are famous. You became nationally known when you decided to set a minimum salary at your company of $70,000 a year. So no one's making less than $70,000 a year. And part of how you financed that was by taking $1 million pay cut yourself. This led to a million news stories about you, and you were interviewed in all of the big daily shows, and a lot of people celebrated this fact. But I imagine you also got a lot of pushback from other entrepreneurs for whom this kind of a move is really verboten. It undermines the ideology that most kind of big brain business thinking is built on. How have you responded to that?
Well, it's true that I did get some pushback, but I also think I got way too much credit for what I did. Because I think it was also kind of held up as kind of like a capitalist fairy tale that would like solve everything, which I think is part of the problem, because the idea of working at a company where the benefits of the company, like that the value that's created is given to the people that are actually working and creating that value, that's something that really any nice 8-year-old would get behind. And so you don't have to be any kind of like a genius CEO. But I think what it exposed is just how low the bar is for somebody like me and those people that you're talking about. And I think that's kind of what's the tough part. But I think the other thing that it highlighted was the need for systemic change because, yeah, we proved that it can work. In the last 6 years, we've tripled in size as a company. Our employee attrition turnover was cut in half. We had a 10x boom in terms of people buying first-time homes, a lot of millennials. And we also had a 10x baby boom. We went from having 0 to 2 babies born per year at the company to 60 in the last 10 years. And so, we had all these wonderful things. And yet, as well as anybody, the macro problem, the systemic problems that something like this was meant to address have gotten worse. So it's been a failure in a sense, and it's also enabled this negative, really destructive ideology that this type of behavior is what we need to flourish. So that's been the tricky part.
I want to ask you a little bit about where you come from and how you came to your kind of politics, because, I got to say, if this were just like a one-off, if you were just some guy who raised your employee's salary, I probably wouldn't have been interested in talking to you on the show. But following you on social media, it feels like your politics, your personal politics and your value system extends much broader beyond just the narrow issue of what an employee's minimum wage is. It feels like you're one of the more radical people who is very, very good at articulating like the basic logic of the left to a broader audience.
Well, I think, you and Virgil and a lot of other people, deserve credit for just like helping people to understand. But we use this term radical. Actually, the ideas that you all espouse are pretty popular across the board. And
I'm trying to tell people.
Yeah, and if you took away kind of propaganda and misinformation, I think it would be the minority of Americans who don't agree with these policies. Most of them would be persuaded if you took away, some of that misinformation that you all are having to fight. But I think that it's been a hard change for me. I'm just trying to learn along with everybody else every day. And that's, I think, what I want to emphasize, because I really did think when I put this into place almost 6 years ago that like it would spread and it would show that the markets could kind of like fix things. And so I was sorely disappointed and kind of proved the opposite. And if nothing else on Twitter and Instagram and places like that, I'm just trying to share what I'm learning with people, because I grew up in a conservative Christian family. I was the fourth of 6 kids. I grew up down the street from a dump between 2 towns that were less than 100 people each. And I was listening to Rush Limbaugh from 10 to 1 every day and learning basically, the gospel of trickle-down economics and Reaganomics and supply-side economics. And that's how I grew up. And so I have to be, honest with you and just say I'm basically just learning all this stuff along with everybody. but because of the position that I'm in, I feel a need to share what I'm learning with people as I go.
So what happened? What sparked your kind of ideological morph?
Well, so 6 years ago, actually, even going back to that, maybe because I've had my company for 17 plus years now and been basically building it my whole life. But 4 or 5 years in, there was a woman that works at Gravity still, but worked at that time. Her name's Rosita. And she thought she was going to get fired. She was like really scared because she got called into my office because I found a McDonald's training manual that she accidentally left behind. And then I realized this amazing person that I work with every day that's probably as responsible for the success of my company as I am was having to moonlight at night and work at McDonald's. And that just seemed so wrong. So, her and I were talking about it, like, how do we change this? How do we make it so you don't have to both work, frankly, way more than a full-time job here, plus, be working a full-time job at nighttime? And that was like a step of it. And then, just more people kind of showing me like the unaffordability. I mean, I saw something today on minimum wage where, the price, the minimum wage has just about doubled in a time when the price of college tuition has 10x'd over the same period. And you have a Republican senator, out there basically saying like, hey, I could pay my way through college on a minimum wage job, so you can too. And so at some point, like, I feel like I can't really give myself credit, but like the facts have just become so overwhelming that, even somebody like me who's in a position where you do tend to be a little bit of out of touch, like those facts are just, unassailable, and we have to follow that.
Yeah, it's like Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor wrote a piece last summer or last spring for the New Yorker called Reality Endorsed Bernie. It's like the conditions that we live in have kind of forced a lot of us to come to certain kinds of conclusions. Can you, for people who don't know, walk us through the story of when you first decided to set a $70,000 minimum wage at your company?
Yeah, I had that background with Rosita. And at that time, we basically said, we're going to set a goal to have 15% average increases per year for wages. And we were able to exceed that goal in 2012, 2013, 2014, and we're on track to exceed it in 2015. But because we were having so much success increasing wages, people's productivity was going up, which, that's the way it works. If you increase people's wages at the bottom, their productivity will go up. It's not rocket science. It's been proven over and over again. So I was getting a little bit better, more balanced life. We were being really successful, but I was still somewhat bought into kind of neoliberalism at that time. So I'm kind of wrestling with it. And I ditched out of work on a Wednesday to go for a hike with one of my favorite hiking partners. Her name's Valerie. And she was explaining to me how a $200 rent increase was basically making it so that her life was unlivable. And this made no sense to me because she was like everything that everybody was supposed to be. She had been in the military for 11 years. She had served in 2 wars. She worked super hard. She worked like 50, 60, 70 hours a week. And so it was kind of incomprehensible for me that this really smart, really interesting, really intelligent, like capable, hardworking person is having a $200 rent increase that's throwing their life in disarray. And I started to feel really angry at her boss, at the system and everything. And then I realized something that was very inconvenient, which was a third of my employees were making less than what Valerie was making. So that was kind of that last thing. And it was a domino. I'd also been coming across this study, this Princeton study from Angus Deaton and Daniel Kahneman that basically showed like there's a sweet spot with how much money you need to make. And if you're making less than that, it is hurting your health and well-being. And if you make more than that, it doesn't necessarily help your health and well-being. So we started to talk about it and orient it around that idea. And then that's what kind of got me over the edge was the hike with Valerie and that study with Daniel Kahneman.
So what happened? What happened when you implemented the minimum wage?
Well, for us, Internally, it was really fantastic. I had a lot of people basically just explain to me that they were in really terrible life circumstances, managing student debt, managing rent, managing all these things that make life unlivable and unaffordable. And people telling me like, hey, now like I'm okay. Like now I can like live my normal life. And it wasn't like I'm going to like buy some palatial mansion somewhere. It was more like, hey, now I can like have a kid if I want to, or save up for a home or pay off debt. There was even one woman who had a really inspiring story of her like doing all the right things to get herself to this company, but she really just wanted to fly her parents out so that they could see that she had become successful and that her parents' hard work had paid off. And she couldn't afford to do that. So now she could like afford to fly her parents out. But, you know, there are all these individual stories, but the statistics really, you know, tell the big picture. And those are those highlights that I kind of gave you at the beginning. So that was the internal thing that was happening. But externally, there was a bit of a war going on over the narrative of the story because Rush Limbaugh came in and opined and said like, hey, you know, these guys are going to fail. Fox News said that my employees would be on the breadlines. They literally used the term breadlines because of this horrible action. And if other companies followed suit, this would happen. And then, you know, even, you know, the kind of corporate media like dove in and really started to give a lot more voice and platform to some of these theories. So, you know, it was a little bit weird because like one day I would be like a hero and the next day I'd be a villain. But, you know, that was all kind of extrinsic to what we were experiencing.
Yeah, it's weird because, you know, you're lauded by people who don't share our politics. And the part that they seem to be lauding is this kind of charitable aspect of it, right? And it's the same people who will say, oh, you know, Dan Price is doing a great thing, but whose coverage, these same media sources, their coverage of, for example, what's just happened with the $15 minimum wage suggests, oh, well, it's fine for Democrats to be willing to negotiate it down. And it's fine for Joe Biden not to fight for it. And it's fine to pretend that the parliamentarian is the fourth branch of government that somehow can stop this process. And, you know, it's fine. You know, it's something to be celebrated when it's an act of individual courage or choice. But the idea of putting your kind of systemic money where your mouth is kind of it seems beyond folks. And when I see moderate Democrats really latching on to the narratives that are out there about how this is what we have to do and bipartisanship and Joe Manchin, that's what makes me want to pull my hair out. And so I'm curious how persuasive you've managed to be since you're having to engage more regularly in a more mainstream business community and also with your community of peers back home in, is it Idaho?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I really believe that at least I struggled for a long time. Am I doing more harm than good systemically? Because it worked really well for the people that are around me every day, which is, you know, that's kind of my job, right? So I care about that a lot. That's probably the first thing I think of when I wake up, and the last thing I think of when I go to bed is like the people that I work with and our clients and all that sort of thing. But systemically, you know, this narrative of like kind of the hero side of it that we're talking about, that really is dangerous because it kind of, I'm going to make up a word, you'll give me a better word, but like unnormalizes this type of behavior. It kind of puts it up on a pedestal that this is some kind of like amazing behavior when truly it isn't. Like this is like totally normal. And like any kid who has not yet been kind of brainwashed by everything around us, consumerism and neoliberalism and all these things. Business school, absolutely. They would think of this as just kind of like unremarkably good. Like, oh yeah, that's nice. Like everybody would do that. That's great. And so I think that I had to come to terms with that. And that's what got me really curious about learning about the systemic side of things was, you know, I don't really want to do harm. You know, that's really important to me to not be like making things worse, not be doing harm. And I think that I was letting myself be used as a little bit of a tool for, the status quo of the current system. And that's when I really needed to speak out.
Last month, we had Representative Ro Khanna. Last Monday, we had Representative Ro Khanna on
last month.
The show. I guess technically it was last month. And
I'm a fan of his. He's great.
I want to ask you, we asked him, whether he identified as a socialist. And he said no, in part because he felt as though, it would have a negative impact on innovation if if you took part of the profit motive out of him. So I don't want to misrepresent what he said. Maybe we should just drop a clip. But basically that, if the profit motive weren't a part of it and if there were full employee ownership, first he said, well, I don't think the government should own companies. And we pointed out that we're talking about employees having ownership stakes in the companies, that he, said that there's a certain amount of innovation trade-off. What do you make of that?
It's tough. I mean, I think that if you look at companies that are owned by employees, in general, they behave better. But I still think it's kind of predicated on the supremacy of shareholders. Mm. And I think that's the tricky part. So, like, if you have a company that is all of a sudden owned by employees, and then all those employees, together decide, oh, this is great, we can be, oligarchs together, it kind of just perpetuates systemically. Now, don't get me wrong, for that company, it's better. And for all those people, it's better. So completely agree with that. But I think that what we really need to do, and I think the minimum wage failures that we've had recently highlight this, I think what we really need to do is to aggressively tax both income and capital, above, let's say, $10 million, so that we do have some systemic protection against like forming the type of aristocracy that we had, in the 19th century, going back to that. And I think that those kind of big picture systemic solutions are really the only ones that will be big enough to work because of how far we've gone.